Just a quick heads up before we start. On Sandwiched, we talk honestly about life, loss, and caregiving. That means conversations may touch on topics such as death and grief. We invite you to listen with care, and please do step away if you need to. Well, welcome everybody. It's another episode of Sandwiched. It's my extreme pleasure. I'm joined today by Anise Goff and Debra J. Fisher. We're going to go ahead and dive right in. And before we get started, Anise, why don't you tell us a little about yourself and also your friend Deb?
Well, hello everyone. My name is Anise Goff. I am based in the greater Los Angeles area, and my background is actually in marketing, and I spent many years as a professional singer. And I am fortunate to know this beautiful soul on here with me, Debra J. Fisher, through my darling husband, Mark, who passed away. And I have been fortunate enough to actually watch Deb in the creative process as she became the showrunner for Ginny in Georgia and just the epic badass that she is. And so it's an honor to be able to do this with her.
It's such an honor. Thank you so much, Paul, for having us on this podcast. Like Anise just said, I too I'm in the greater Los Angeles area. My background, I've been writing, producing, and show running TV for the past 25 years. And I met Anise through her husband, Mark, who I was friends with for over 10 years, and which we're going to get into and talk about a lot. And something that she and I have talked about so much over the past 2 years since his passing and her mom's passing. So we're really looking forward to opening up this discussion about grief.
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate that. So as we're getting started, maybe we'll go ahead and start with, in kind of some of the pre-conversations, Anise, I believe you've called yourself double sandwiched. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
I think I double sandwiched, and also I called it an epic shit sandwich, excuse the language, because my mom and my husband passed away 18 days apart. And it's one of those experiences that you can't explain it. You can't describe it. It's a mind-blowing experience. And so to have both of those things sort of happening at once, my mom passes away, but I've got to take care of my husband, so I can't focus on my mom. It's a double sandwich.
Yeah. Gosh, I can't even imagine. And 18 days, is that what you said?
18 days.
Wow. And as we're diving in, were either of those expected or were they both more of a surprise?
Neither was expected.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, neither was expected. My mother actually died suddenly while I was sitting in the hospital with my husband. And then 18 days later, I remember that conversation with the doctor that morning, and even the nurses were like, this wasn't supposed to happen. So yeah, it was definitely not expected on either side.
Wow, sounds like it. And Deb, along the way, please feel free to jump in. From what I understand, I know you were with Anise through this journey. You were friends with her husband. So, dive in wherever it feels most comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. As a person who was able to witness this journey with Mark and Anise, and knowing, Mark was a very good friend. And when I met Anise, when they started dating, and she became like family to me as well. And to witness this that summer, 2 summers ago, um, profoundly changed my life in many ways as well. Although Mark and I, we were not blood related, to witness what Anise went through, and like she had said, and we'll get into great more detail of this, but as someone who was able to be present for her and for him, and she had just lost her mother 18 days earlier, it has profoundly changed me in many ways, which Anise and I talk about, and we can get into much more detail about that. But grief, it is a whammy, and Anise got the double whammy shit sandwich. And the thing is, being a writer, like if I were to write this, no one would believe me. If I were like to create a story around this, they would say that's ridiculous. Like that's too much. And it was.
And it's real. It's true. It's, and you were there to witness it, secondhand because you were by her side. So I can't wait to learn more and to dive in. And as I've shared before, thank you so much for entrusting us with your story, and let's get started. So, obviously losing your mother while your husband was also battling, I believe it was cancer. Is that correct?
Battling lung cancer.
Okay. And was this years, months before, or was this really rapid?
He got sick early June. We thought it was the flu. And a week later, he couldn't walk upstairs. And I'm taking him to urgent care, and they're rushing him over to the hospital and sticking a needle in his heart at 2 a.m. And that's where this whole thing started. And then a month later, we find out that there is a mass on his right lung, and that was what was causing the fluid that they had to drain because it was rubbing against his lung. And then on July 18th, they did the biopsy. So literally like a month and a half.
Yeah.
July 18th, they do the biopsy, and the doctor tells me that she knows it is cancer. We just don't know the stage at this point.
Okay.
And then 2 days later was when my mom died.
Gosh.
Yeah. So it was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And then we come back. I think it was 4 days after my mom passed is when they gave us the official diagnosis, which was stage 4 inoperable lung cancer, and they gave him 2 years to live.
And sadly, he did not get 2 years.
He got 2 weeks.
Gosh, 2 years, but only got 2 weeks. Wow. I can't even imagine, as much as you could, obviously you were there with your husband. If I try and think about if I was given 2 years, or to your point, even 2 weeks, I don't even know where I would begin. Walk me through what conversations the two of you were having receiving this information.
Well, it was interesting. You realize things happen for a reason at the time that they do. That morning, we had a friend that was there in the room when the doctors told us. And I remember them saying it, and I'm hearing it. And then Mark got very calm.
Mm.
I'm usually the one that's like this, and he's like, oh God. And it was almost eerily calm. He looked at the doctor and he said, how long do I have? And she said 2 years. And as soon as the doctors left, I remember slamming whatever I was holding down on the floor and just screaming. And our friend that was in the room, my phone started ringing, and it was a friend of mine that knew what was going on. I said, tell her what's going on. She'll know who to call. And as soon as she leaves, I remember Mark looked at me and he said, do not let me suffer. Whatever you do, please don't let me suffer. Okay, I'm not going to cry. I promise. I'm going to try and keep it together. But he said, I want you to take me to Oregon if it's getting bad, because Oregon is a right to die state.
Yes.
And I think at that point, because he saw what I was going through, my mom had just died 4 days before. I think he sort of went into, I am not going to say anything to scare her.
Mm.
And so I don't think he told me, like, I don't think I'm coming out of this. I think he knew it.
Yeah.
And towards the end, when I reflect back on things that he said, I think he knew it, but he wasn't saying anything at that point. So we honestly hadn't talked about, what do you want your funeral arrangements to be?
Yeah.
What do you want? Because I'll be honest, I was not in denial that my husband was sick. I knew he was sick. I knew we had a rough road ahead of us. But him dying 2 weeks after my mother, that never entered my brain.
Yeah. How could it? It just couldn't. And a doctor, right, who we put a lot of trust in, and they do their best, right? I worked in healthcare. They look at kind of all the indications and give estimates, right?
Right. It's a practice. It's a medical practice.
Practice, exactly. I want to take a moment. Part of what I'm trying to do is I think some folks who might be listening, some of these terms and words might be new. And so obviously with Oregon's laws, the laws are different than some other states. Would you mind just sharing from your perspective why Oregon, and help people understand why he shared that with you for anybody who might not know what that means?
Sure. So Oregon is what's considered a right to die state, where if you decide that, you have a terminal illness and you get to make the choice on how you pass away, is basically how that works. And I think for Mark did everything on his own terms. That's who he was. He was like, I'm gonna do it this way. You can like it or you don't like it. And I feel like this would have been no different. And quite honestly, even the way that he passed away, it was on Mark's terms.
Well, I think that's the best we could have hoped for in a not great situation. Yeah, so thank you. Appreciate you sharing that. I noticed that some key kind of themes had emerged in early conversations when we were talking to the both of you and preparing for this. Walk to me about the tsunami of loss and really what that experience has been like, kind of navigating that, because tsunami is a big word, right? That implies a lot. There's a lot within that. So let's dig into that a little more.
So I kind of gave the analogy of you go out on a boat one day and all of a sudden a storm comes in and completely just destroys that boat and you are out in the water and a tsunami comes in and you're just gasping for air. You can't breathe and you are just trying to stay alive is what it feels like when those losses happen. And then there's a point where you kind of get spit up on the dock, if you will. And I've actually often used, I don't know if you know about, there's a bridge in Florida, and I cannot think of the name of it, but I think it goes from like Tampa to Clearwater.
Okay.
And once you're on it, you can't turn around. Like there's no, and it is like miles and miles and miles long. That's sort of the experience. Like there's no going back because you're not that person anymore. And now you're walking on this bridge, and every so often, the tsunami will remind you that the grief is still there and it'll knock you back in the water and you have to figure out how to get back up, waterlogged and exhausted. And you just keep going until you finally get to a point where maybe you're on the shore. But the grief is always there and it comes every so often and it knocks you down. And I think that's the best way I can kind of articulate it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that. And Deb, please, you were witnessing, you were navigating your own grief as a friend, right? And also seeing Anise going through this, and also the loss of a friend.
Yeah, and I love the way you just described it. I will say also in that tsunami, witnessing a friend going through his health journey and witnessing his wife, who's also my dear friend, just losing her mom. And when we know about tsunamis, and it takes so much with it. It takes lives, it takes cars, buildings, like everything. There's so much in it, and it's so complicated and overwhelming. And it also, at times, I remember during that summer and initially when Mark got sick, the first time in the group chat when Anise texted us all, that the very first time when he went to the ER, and we had like stopped by, and it was like, whoo, thankfully you got him here in time. Like, remember those feelings? It was like, thank God you got him here in time. Like, what a close call. Everything's going to be okay.
Right. Oh my God. Yes.
And it reminds us like how quickly life can turn, because just a couple weeks later it was stage 4, and then her mom passing away, and then him back in the hospital. And I remember just thinking all the time, like, is this really happening?
Yeah.
I couldn't believe, I felt like I was a version of myself looking at all of us. Like, I sometimes didn't know if I was in my body, and I would try to be, because I wanted to be there for Anise. I wanted to be there to support Mark. And when you're not a blood relative, it's like you want to be respectful, but also hold these people who I do love like family. So it's like a tsunami. It's violent and it's scary and it's like all of that. It's like everything, and the calmness of the water. It's like all everything in once. And we lived something really unimaginable that summer, I think.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it's such a good way to describe it, right? I've heard things like people talking about that grief comes in waves, but I agree with you to that point. But with death, dying, and after loss, right? It's much more of a tsunami at times, right? It comes in way faster than we're prepared, and it takes us over and envelops us sometimes. With my grandparents passing, I had shared I was very close with them, but it was actually with my grandmother. My grandfather passed away about 5 years earlier, and my grandmother about a year and a half earlier. And it took me that long because I worked in healthcare during COVID, and so did my fiance at the time, right? So we were long hours. We were trying to maintain our own health so we could show up for work, right? And I just didn't feel like I had the time to really navigate the grief. And then I leave a corporate job. I take a 4-month road trip across the US, which is where actually the idea of Tumbleweed was born. And I was enveloped by grief with my grandparents passing. And it was like, wait, where have you been? Like, it was just laying dormant until my body said, okay, now's the time to look at it, right? And very different than your situation, obviously, but it was so interesting to me that I felt so emotional, 5 years later for my grandfather, and a year and a half later for my grandmother. I'm like, where have you been? Like, I thought I was okay. And then all of a
No,
sudden, it
that's
wasn't.
delayed grief. That
Yeah.
is delayed grief. And thank God for Deb, because she has really been my rock through this. We have now, like, I send her voice notes when I'm having a moment.
Mm.
And it was, I think, last year for my mom's birthday, it hit me like a ton of rocks. It was horrible. I couldn't get out of bed. I was hysterically crying all day. And this year, I was finally able to connect the thread that there was something around my birthday
Oh.
that would cause me to go into a grief spiral. I know all the terms now. So, a grief spiral, most times you don't know that you're in it. It just sort of overtakes you and it is a prolonged thing. There's also things that are called grief ambushes. And an ambush is like you look at the clock behind you and it was the clock your grandmother had on her wall, and all of a sudden it causes you to have a moment. But you typically can kind of move through those. You can have a grief ambush while you're in a spiral, but typically, like, the spiral is kind of its own amorphous thing. I was in a grief spiral after my birthday, didn't know it, and I'm out for a walk and I'm going to go buy my mom a card because that was one of the things that my therapist had recommended around the grief. I was literally sitting on the floor in CVS with my sunglasses on, crying hysterically. And this was just in April of this year. And I could not get it together. And I remember thinking, oh God, please don't let anybody walk by me because I cannot get it together right now. And the thing was, because I was out for a walk, I had to walk home. And I remember leaving Deb a message, and I was like, I just need to say this right now because I'm not okay. And my point is that delayed grief, you don't realize what's going to trigger it. Now, I was fortunate to get into therapy right away, and my therapist, her specialty is in grief support,
Okay.
which has been huge.
Yeah.
But she asked me a question after when I talked to her. She said, well, what used to happen on your birthday? And I was like, well, my mom would tell me about the day I was born. And Mark, I'd wake up and he'd have coffee from my favorite place and he'd have my gifts. And she said, and you're not getting that anymore.
And you're not getting it twice over.
Right.
And
Like,
so you don't realize that that's causing the grief because it's not happening. Like, my birthday was lovely. Me and Deb went out, had an amazing time. So I had a great birthday. It was the weeks after.
Yeah.
wow.
It's interesting when we talk about waves and spirals, and I get to live and with Anise through this. So hearing when she's talking with through her grief therapist, and obviously I have outside help and therapy around this too. But
Me too.
and you were talking about, like, in terms of like amount of time, and I think one of the biggest things about spirals and grief waves is I think we assume that grief is something that we will move through. It's like we will, it's like, here it is, and we will move through it, and the grief will stay over here, and we're beyond it. And what the three of us know, what people learn, like, you never move through it. We will always carry it with us, and our lives now revolve around this thing that we carry. And it's like, how do we move forward
Yeah.
one day at a time, one step at a time, carrying this with us always, because it will never leave.
Yeah.
And over the years, having other people that have passed as well, and I'm like, we will carry them all with us, all of them,
Yeah.
Well, and
always.
that's, I think, an important thing too, Deb, is that it's the realization that grief isn't linear.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's not like, oh, I hit this
Not the
benchmark, I'm
5 steps
six
they
months.
talk about. Like, you go step one, step two.
Yeah.
No, no, no.
No. And it's funny, even that, like, I never went through the anger step.
Mhm.
I was never angry about what happened. And
Yeah.
so I think it's because we don't talk about grief in this country. I think sometimes it's like I don't even know how to tell people what I'm feeling because I don't know what I'm feeling. And then it's like then I don't want to bother anybody because does this make sense? And there is no right or wrong way.
No, there's not. And it's not linear. And to your point, maybe your anger for you is just that moment of throwing down whatever it was when you found out, right? I think emotions, like each of us carry them in very different ways and they look very different. And so, that's very interesting. But even to your point, I've been lucky enough to live abroad and I've lived in other countries. I've spent a lot of time. I grew up in Arizona, spent 23 years in California. My ex-fiance is Latino. So I spent very deep rooted experiences in Latino community in Latin American countries. And their experience and the way they look at death and dying is different in many ways. Not, it's the same in others, but they view it slightly different. And so I've got to see it from, even Dia de los Muertos, right? Where it's kind of the celebration and the remembrance and them coming back to connection, right? I think that here in the US in general, I feel like a lot of us are struggle with how do we navigate this? How do we talk about it? We fear mortality. And I'm not saying I tell people all the time, like the work I do, I feel very privileged that one, I faced my mortality at a very young age for a very unique reason, which allows me, I feel like, to live a better life. Like I really get to focus on what do I want my life to look like? What are my goals? I don't want to die tomorrow, but if I did, I feel like it would be okay because I get to do the things I love. Like even this conversation we're having right now, like it's meaningful. I feel like it's going to bring value to community. And those are the things that I live for. Right. And so that's my undertone of hope for people is it's hard and it's uncomfortable, but please lean in. And that's kind of the goal of Sandwich. Just how do we start to bring these conversations into the conscious, and with our aging population, like it's just going to continue. Like this is not going away tomorrow.
No, and I actually wrote an article about grieving while working full time because first of all, I know my experience wasn't traditional or typical, I should say, in terms of like the way that my job handled things.
Mhm.
They were so compassionate and loving and supportive and kind. And this is a very large corporation. So it's not like a little
Yeah.
small mom and pop company where everyone knows you. And the way that I was handled, even down to, at the point that we knew Mark's cancer, the diagnosis, I knew I was going to have to be off. And so I had to call in and do FMLA, and even their policy around that, I still got 100% of my salary,
Mm.
which is not really normal. And just the kindness with which people handled me. It was never like, okay, you're back at work. Because I think what happens is, oh, the person lost who they lost. Send flowers. Okay, it's been a week. You're back at work. Okay, you're fine.
Yep.
And we think that's it. Where, like, I remember there was a day, this always sticks out. I had gone back to work. And part of the reason I had gone back to work was because I was asking the dog who I should grieve first.
Mm.
And I remember thinking, you just asked the dog who you should grieve first, and she's not going to answer.
I was like, what did Goldie say?
So my dog
No,
has the
Goldie.
best face ever. She looks like she's judging you at all times. And so she's just kind of looking at me like, do you really think I have an answer for you, ma'am? And so I knew I had to go back to work, but I had gone back. I had to go fill out paperwork to close down my mom's banking.
Okay.
I knew I had to do that. But it is this thing where it's like it's a finality. It's like
Yeah.
all these moments of finality. And I was okay with that. But when I got home, in the mailbox was Mark's death certificate and his tissue donation certificate. I was non-functional.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I remember reaching out to my job and saying, I just need to let you know what just happened and I'm not okay. And their response was, we love you. And when you want to come back, let us know. And it was as simple as that.
I so love that you have that support at work
Yes.
because I
Yeah.
Yeah.
don't think many companies do that. We don't in this country talk about mental health in the way that we should, to your point of living upon other countries and just to hear that you had that support is just so comforting.
It really is. And the most interesting part, it's 2 years later, and I
Yeah.
still have that support.
That's wonderful. Well, that they are definitely exemplifying what I hope all organizations choose to do, right? I shared I worked in healthcare. I was on the front lines and moved into hospital administration later in my career. So I worked in HR and organizational development. And so I was in benefit decision making and HR policy design and all of that. And so I love that you're exemplifying what best practices can look like. And yeah, some have a cost to it, but others don't. Just being warm and kind and saying, hey, like we see you, like that's okay. We get it. Take a little bit of extra time, or if you need to, like, it's okay if you need to cry, no problem. Maybe we've got a breastfeeding room. You can use that, right? If it's not being used, like getting creative about some of those things. So I'm so grateful that you had that. Yeah.
Even with the cost thing, I think sometimes they have to look at it bigger picture because maybe it cost you because I wasn't there, but what did occur is I am loyal, which
Yeah.
means I'm not going anywhere, and you're going to get the absolute best out of me because of how I was treated.
Yep.
So you made an investment, and that investment is going to yield you 10 times what you actually paid.
Yep. Because you're talking about it, right? Your word of mouth is of high value, right? And they're always looking at engagement and turnover. And you mitigated turnover and they gave better engagement. So definitely reasons to do it. So I'm so glad that you experienced that and also that you both talked about it. I wanted to ask you, I believe you went to pretty early on some grief support groups. Tell me a little bit about that.
I'm laughing because the first grief support group that I went to was actually what made me go, this has to be a TV show. And I remember, I don't know if I called Deb that night, but it was probably shortly after. And I was like, Deb, I got an idea for a show because I can't make this up. So it was 1 week to the day after Mark died. And I'd had a crazy incident happen earlier in the day where the hospital called me and asked me when I was picking Mark up or having him picked up. My husband just died. He's not like a sweater that I left behind. So that was bad enough. But I knew I was like, I don't have tools for this.
Yeah.
So I'm going to find myself a grief support group. And so I found one and I went in and I walk in and everyone is 80 and white. And there's me. And they were lovely humans, but one of the women was like, "Do you want to tell us why you're here?" And I said, "Well, my mom passed away on July 20th and my husband passed away a week ago." And when I say hysterical histrionics, like I mean just wailing, crying, screaming, and I'm sitting there like, "Isn't it my grief?" But there was one woman in particular because she was so hysterical. And I remember I was like, this is a TV show. It was at this moment when I felt myself reaching out and I said, "Are you okay?" And I remember thinking, and I saw the television where it was like the character turns to the screen, it's like, why am I the soul in this old bitch? And
Uh-huh.
I was like, oh, this is a TV show. And so that was my first experience with grief support. And it was a little odd. And then I started doing an app. And the woman that I had, she was a lovely human, but my grief support or my grief therapy was her session to talk about her grandmother. So that was the next one. And then I finally got into a grief group through this organization. I guess it was almost a year later. But the problem is it's almost a year later. So I have been on this journey for a minute. Some of the other people had more recently lost their spouses. And what I started noticing was the empath in me, I would get on the call and I'd be feeling great. And by the end of the call, I'm hysterically crying and I don't know why because I've taken on everybody else's grief.
Yep.
Right. Yeah,
And
yeah.
so I remember getting to a point where I talked to my therapist about it and I said, look, I just feel like this isn't helping me. They're lovely people and I could see myself volunteering, but I don't know that this is helping me in the present. And she said, I'm okay if you let go of it. because she said, you're right. If it's causing you, like you are having a good day, things are good. And then by the end of the call, you can't stop crying. She said, yeah, you can't do that.
Yeah.
So that was my experience. I do believe in grief support though, because having people that understand what you're going through, that can relate to it, it is helpful. But I think it was just the circumstances of that particular group just didn't align.
Yeah. Shared experience, right? I think that's what often we're looking for. Deb, please look like you're going to share.
Sure. I was gonna, Anise and I have talked about this a lot, her experience and what got us talking about like this grief group. We need this out in the world. And luckily, we have a group of like 25 friends that we kind of have our own grief support in a way, but also because I try to take care of my mental health. Like I had a lot of conversations with my somatic therapist about this and my life coach, like intense things like this. And there's not, you think about grief group and it's for widows and people who've lost their mother, their father. And there's not like a grief group for like friends. But so thankfully we have a very tight-knit group of about 20 some people that we pick up the phone all the time and talk about Mark. We have a little group chat when things come up, when we see certain birds and things like that. But I do want to say two things that I have learned from my somatic therapist around this. And it's something that I think like Mark would say too. And when after Mark passed, it changed my life so profoundly in everything that I do, everything, whether it's having coffee with a friend, making a phone call. If it's not a hell yeah, it's a no.
Mm.
That is one of my mantras since he has passed. If it's not a hell yeah, it's a no. And also, what would Mark say in this instance? And secondly, an exercise that I have done for myself because I journal a lot. Every week since Mark has passed, I write every Sunday, if this were the last week of my life, would I be happy how I spent it? And to look back at every week over the past 2 years, how my thinking about that statement has evolved so profoundly, because initially it was like, oh, I got my like to-do list done and do, and like I got the work thing. And now it's had a great phone call with a dear friend.
Yeah.
You know, I saw hummingbirds in the yard. I washed my hair today. It was really taking it down to like the little things. And that is the things that I've learned with talking to our group of friends and like my therapist about grief over the past 2 years.
Yes.
Can I piggyback on that?
Sure.
Because
Yes.
to Deb's point, obviously both of these tremendous losses have impacted me greatly. I am not the person that I was 2 years ago. But one of the things that I had to do, even in that, I had journals and I've kept those journals. And I found one from when like right after my mom died. And I was writing a gratitude list.
Mm.
Mhm.
While I was sitting in the hospital with Mark, it was like, you know what? Find something to be grateful for today. And in this weird way, what I'm about to say is probably going to sound odd to most people, but what happened brought me a lot of gifts.
Mhm.
Because when your mother dies suddenly while you're in the hospital with your husband, and then he gets diagnosed and then he dies, there's no contingency plans. Now, I'm a project manager by trade. And so I'm going to have a contingency plan, and that plan's going to have a contingency
Yep.
plan. We got a solution. I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
All I could do was be present. And now knowing how things ended up, I am so glad that I was present for Mark, because I didn't know those were his last weeks of life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so for me, being present with people, like right now, nothing matters to me except for Paul H. Richardson Jr. and Deb Fisher. That's it. What's going to happen in an hour, 2 hours, I don't care, because it's not my business. But this right now is what matters. And that's the gift of this for me.
It is. That's beautiful. And it reminded me when we were talking earlier about the tsunami, right? And I think something you both shared in different ways is it brings in a lot and it takes a lot, right? And I think it really is interesting that to that point, and I've felt the same way in many different ways, is, I miss my grandparents, and there are things I miss about friends that I lost way too early. Even my own experience with facing my mortality as a teenager, right? And on the other side of it is there are a lot of gifts I've been given because I do get to lean into life, right? I think that's the way I try and do it. And I'm not perfect at it. And there are moments I have to remind myself, like, okay, you're just in a hard week. But remember, like, these are all the great things. These are all the moments of gratitude. To your point, Deb, I got up this morning and I brushed my hair and I got dressed. And I didn't do that the last 3 days. So I'm gonna celebrate that moment, because whatever that temporary feelings of depression or sadness, whatever it was, has now passed. And I'm ready to lean back in. So, so beautifully said. And that really made me think about kind of the tsunami can really have a lot of destructive components. And it can also, too, bring beauty that we hadn't seen before. A beautiful sky, that was like, oh, wow, where did this come from, right? We just don't know. So I love that. The other thing I wanted to circle back, which really resonated with something you both shared. One is, as a recovering people pleaser, I loved, and I call myself a recovering people pleaser on purpose because I am in recovery. I am getting better. I do not do it well, but it so resonated when you said, if it's not a hell yes, it's a no. I am taking that with me because it's really hard sometimes. And I love to give and I love to experience, and I just can't. Like, I don't always have capacity or energy. And so then it's like, to your point, like being able to define it. Is this like an easy yes or a hell yes? Okay. Or is this, then it's no. Oh, wow. Like, really, that really resonated. So I just wanted to double click on that. Anise, really kind of with the people pleasing is I'm also an empath, right? And so, I'm the eldest child. I have always had a lot of empathy. My mother lives with mental illness. She has since I was a young person. She's been institutionalized many times since I was about 11 years old. And I've been the primary caregiver for her and my siblings at many points in time. And while there's been some challenges, right, that is a gift, but I really like the empath person. I've also learned, there is energy, and it's, as an empath, I feel like we take in a lot more than some people. And it's just the way we're built, right? Whether it's personality, whether it's lived experience. But I think it's so great that your therapist called out like, hey, if this isn't adding to your cup, it's taking away, then it's okay to remove yourself and find a new space that's going to actually give it to you in a different way, right? And maybe it's art, maybe it's running, maybe, we don't know. For each of us, it could look different. So I just wanted to kind of, those things really resonate, and I wanted to circle back to those. Thank you.
Well, Paul, let me blow your mind right now.
Always.
Because my mother too battled. She was a mental health warrior. And one of the things that I have literally within the last couple of weeks connected and understood as a fellow people pleaser, part of that comes from you've been in grief. It's all grief, because you're grieving the childhood that you didn't get to have. You're grieving the loss of your innocence. You're grieving the mother that you don't know. Like all of it is grief.
Yeah. You're right.
Thanks for reminding us about that.
Yeah.
Oh, and one other thing, Paul, as I don't know if I'm recovered people pleasing, but I do work a strong program around that. But also, in addition to if it's not a hell yeah, it's a no. No is a complete sentence.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
And when I go into a 10-sentence explanation as to why I'm not doing something, that's also a trauma response. And
woo, yes.
To learn, no is a complete sentence. And if I can do it in 3 sentences, like that's it. So I really work a hard no codependency program.
Yes, right? Yes. Well, and I don't know, but I'm going to guess, right? Maybe we'll do a survey at some point. I'm going to guess a lot of our listeners are probably feeling all of what we're talking about right now. And a lot of people do, right? Not just in death and dying or caring for an aged loved one, but I think the folks who I believe will find us, I think it's really going to resonate with folks. This episode of Sandwiched is brought to you by Tumbleweed. Tumbleweed is a purpose-driven platform helping families navigate aging, caregiving, and legacy planning with ease and compassion. Right now, the first 100 listeners to sign up will receive a free Tumbleweed membership for 1 full year. That's a value of over $100. But once those 100 spots are gone, they're gone. So don't delay. Go to tumbleweedplan.com. That's Tumbleweed, plan.com, click Get Started, fill in your account details, and enter the promo code SANDWICHED, SANDWICHED. Thanks for listening. Now back to today's episode. So tell me more. You both work in the entertainment industry right now, and you've talked and shared a little bit about, ideation and creativity around this needs to be a TV show. Are you willing to share a little more and talk to us about it? I just want to understand, what are you thinking? Because I am all in and I can't wait to say yes.
You know what? I'll say this. One of the things that I started doing was watching a lot of television shows about loss because I wanted to understand how it had been approached. And the one thing that I noticed in every movie, every TV show is that you get maybe the hospital scene or how the person died. You get the funeral. And then you get that big blow up moment at the refrigerator or in the bathtub where they throw something, they scream, and then it's 2 years later.
Yeah.
But no one really ever talks about the year of the firsts, the grief spirals, the grief ambushes, the stupid stuff that people say to you where you're like, were you dropped on your head? And I realized that for me, this concept is an opportunity for people that are grieving to feel like they are seen. And for someone that may not know how to support someone grieving, because God knows I have probably said some stupid stuff in my life. I know I've probably because I think what happens is people want to connect and they want to compare. It's like, I can relate to what you're saying, where honestly, you can't relate. What I went through is not typical. So don't try and equivocate my experience, because you're never going to be able to do that. And so I just realized that it was this opportunity to educate people on how do you support someone, because it isn't talked about.
Yeah, absolutely.
It really isn't. It is not talked about. And everything Anise brought up, we want to dramatize.
Yep.
And we want to do it in a way that we are going to laugh and cry.
Mm-hmm.
We think that is just also an important part of the grief journey is laughing. And there's such a thin line between, inappropriate humor, which we talk about all the time. And if I'm not laughing and crying, then we're not doing it right, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, it's funny when you're talking about the laughing piece. So I shared earlier that I had taken a 4-month road trip. And I realized pretty early on that I was holding on to grief with my grandparents and started to navigate through that a little bit. It was only a few weeks into the journey. My grandparents on that side are from Iowa. So I was like, well, I've never been to Iowa before, but they always talked about it, especially my grandmother when I was growing up. So I'd heard all these stories and I was like, well, I'm going to be going through Iowa. So I'm going to go and visit their hometowns. I'm going to go and see all these things they talked about. And I did, and it was fantastic. I got to go to their hometowns, which have not changed much, especially my grandmother's town. She's from a tiny little town of about 2,000 people. I was able to actually find her childhood home based on memories of my aunt saying, well, I think it was on this street, but I can't remember the name. Sent her a picture. She's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you found it, which was super interesting. But what was most interesting was, and it actually, when I found it, I just started cracking up, was my grandfather passed a few years before my grandmother. And so my grandmother kept his urn in her nursing home until she passed, until we put them together and interred them. And my mom, I'm creative, right? So I do artistic things and I'm always repurposing stuff. So my mom brings me, after we clear out my grandmother's assisted living home, his empty urn. It's just like this wood urn, right? And she's like, I think you can do something really creative with this. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do with it. So I put it in the garage. Then my ex and I, we pack up our home. I get ready for this road trip. And I have no idea how, but my grandfather's urn ended up in the RV in a box that I didn't find until I was almost to Iowa. And I just started cracking it up. And my grandfather loved to travel and he loved RVing. So this was an RV trip. And he had always said to my grandmother, I want us to have one last big RV trip before we actually leave. And it was the most interesting experience, but it gets better. I talked to you about being creative. So about 10 years ago, my grandmother used to wear a lot of chunky costume jewelry in the 80s and 90s. And I had for a couple of years, I've been talking to her like, hey, I have started making these Christmas snowflakes out of repurposed jewelry. And I want to do a gift for all of the kids and grandkids. Can I have some? And so she gave me like 8 or 10 of those necklaces, and I turned them in, and everyone loved the experience. I still had one of her necklaces that was also happened to be in the RV. And so I ended up doing a small memorial in Iowa, but it was so interesting because it was like, how did this happen? I don't know if that as I'm packing, I'm like, oh, I'm going to need this on this RV trip. And it was just, I was not paying attention, but it definitely, especially my grandfather's urn, it just made me burst out laughing. All right. And so I did a little memorial celebration for them, and it was very cathartic, and it made me think about kind of the bittersweet moments that happen, and we can lean in or we can freak out, right? Like, who knows? We could have so many responses, but it was just, it really made me remember those moments, and it brought me a lot of joy. So thank you.
It sounds like they wanted to go with you. That's
They
what I
did.
heard.
They
Yeah,
did.
they wanted to go with you.
They did. Yep. Yep. They
Everything
did.
happens exactly how it is supposed to. So
Yes, indeed.
That it does. It does. Can you tell me a little about from your experience, Anise, and also Deb as well? Are there songs, smells? Are there things that just will randomly pop up into your mind, or that you'll be walking somewhere and it will just, Mark will be there with you, your mom will be there with you? I know that a lot of folks experience some of those things. So I would love to hear what that's been like for you.
Deb knows what I'm about to say. So Mark is hummingbirds and feathers.
Okay.
And when he first passed, one of our friends, she was sitting outside in her backyard under an umbrella, and a huge hawk came and landed on the umbrella. And she was like, what the? Because Mark's favorite animal, his spirit animal, was a hawk. His email was one hawk.
Oh, wow.
And so that was the first. And I think it was a couple of weeks I wasn't seeing anything. And then we had this odd tropical storm. And I remember walking my dog and just kind of talking to him. And the next morning, when I opened the curtains and I looked out on the balcony, I had this little frame structure that was shaped like a house. There was a hummingbird sitting there, and it was looking inside, and it stayed for 2 weeks. And hummingbirds don't sit. This one stayed. I mean, from the moment I opened, if it got spooked, it would fly away for a millisecond and come back, and it would stay until I closed the curtains at night. And I remember telling myself, do not get attached to this hummingbird. He's just letting you know he's okay.
Yeah.
With my mom, the day after I saw her, I was at my friend's house and I was talking to my dad, and I saw the most beautiful bright red cardinal fly by. And I went, Daddy. And I'm pointing to the cardinal, and he's like, I don't see it. I'm like, it's literally sitting there looking at us. He's like, how can you tell? Because I'm like, I'm looking at it. It's looking at me. And then when it flew away, he said, oh my God, she's gone. And that was kind of a moment. And then after that, last year, I did something called the Camino de Santiago. And it is this amazing journey. It's a walking pilgrimage through Spain.
Okay.
And you walk, everybody has different reasons why they walk, but it's been around since the medieval times. And it's believed that one of the disciples is buried in this city in Spain. And so you do this pilgrimage. The whole thing, I think there's like 3 or 4 routes you can take. The whole thing is like 500 miles. We did the last 100 miles. But as we would walk, every single day, I would see a bird fly by. It was this black and white bird. I was like, what is this bird? And it was happening so frequently that I asked one of the women, who's a dear friend of mine now, I was like, there is this black and white bird I keep seeing, and I don't know what it is. And one flew by. And she goes, you mean like that one? I was like, yeah.
Quit talking about me.
Right. It was like, oh, okay. So then one of the guys in our group starts finding black and white feathers on the ground, and he would give them to me. And every single time he gave them to me, they disintegrated, like disappeared, couldn't find them. I mean, I tore up a hotel room looking for the feather. It was gone. When we finally get to the final destination, it's very emotional because you have walked a very long time. You're exhausted, and it's this sense of accomplishment, and all these things are sort of swirling. But it was like clockwork. Everybody sort of looks up at the same time and then turns and looks at me wide-eyed because all the statues at the top of the basilica were holding feathers.
Wow.
And I was like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what it is. And then I get back to the States and I'm getting ready to move. I had bought a place and I'm getting ready to move and I found this Valentine. Mark wrote this Valentine when he was 7 years old, 30 days before I was born. And I remembered it because he had talked about it at my birthday party or the year before, but I don't remember the speech because I was caught up in the moment of the party. So I read this and it says, "Will you be my Valentine? Will you be my Valentine? And I will fly to you with two feathers and I will love you like a dove." And he drew black and white birds and feathers. And I remember thinking, oh my God, oh God. And it's like, as soon as I had that aha moment, all the lights in the condo went crazy.
Wow.
And so feathers has just been this thing that has been a consistent thing. I can't walk my dog and not see feathers. I see them everywhere.
I know all
Beautiful.
those stories, and it's so fun. I have a crazy couple stories too that Anise knows all of these. And there's a meeting that I go to every Saturday and I would see Mark at it. And so every time I go on Saturday, I look at the place where he and I would sit, every day and feel him there. Like a lot of our friends are there and everyone talks about Mark on this Saturday. But after that meeting, it was probably in January of this year, I was having like a really bad day and came home and I was crying and I was sitting in my car in my driveway. And I live in a very busy city part of Los Angeles. It's like high rises, apartment buildings, concrete jungle. And I'm sitting like under my neighbor's tree is here and I'm crying and I'm talking to Mark out loud. And I'm like, here's what's going on and blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, flying right toward me in the car is a hawk. And I turn on my thing because it's coming like right at me. And obviously I didn't get my phone out, but it lands in the branch above me. And Anise has this recording. And this hawk is staring down. I'm looking and it is looking down at me. And I'm like, oh my God, Anise, there's this hawk that's like flying here. Oh my God. And I'm like, it's mine. And I'm like having this whole conversation with this hawk who's there for a couple of minutes and then flies off. And there's a lot like after Anise did the Camino de Santiago, I too did the Camino de Santiago. And she gave me her backpack that she used. And let me tell you that there was like, I was in and out, like, it's just a little backpack. It wasn't like a whole lot of slots. It just had like the two on the side and the thing. And when we first arrived, we were in this city called Vigo, which is like 100 kilometers, like you're doing like the last 100 kilometers. So we had this like day where we took this boat out to this island and we were all like walking. It was like a free fun day. And we're waiting for the ferry to come back. And I said, I'm going to run to the restroom where you guys watch the backpack. This thing has been with me as I traveled from Los Angeles to Spain, and I was around before that. I come back, and on the side pocket, there's a giant feather like stuck into it. And I said, who put this here? And they were like, what are you talking about? I was like, how did this giant feather get stuck in here while I just went to the restroom and came back? And they're like, I don't know. It was so hilariously crazy, but not at the same time. And then one time, and you remember I was walking out, I was like talking to you on the phone, and I go, oh my God. And there was a giant hawk feather at my house.
Yeah.
And I was like, took a picture of it because they're very long. And I was like, whoa, Mark is like telling me to go do the Camino because I was trying to figure out if I go. So he's always around, whether it's a hummingbird or a hawk or something. Like he's flying around all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. He's
We're
with
connected.
us.
Yeah.
And we have
Good to see
friends
that.
that see hawks, they'll go on hikes. They're like, there's a hawk. And we're just like laugh in our little group chat.
I
We're
love
Well,
like,
it.
and it was funny because so Deb did the Camino. She gives me the backpack back. I go to do a walk, the travel, the Sisterhood of the Traveling Backpack. But I go do one of my walks because now my body craves long walks after doing the Camino. And so I'm out doing my walk and I come back and I empty out the backpack. There was no feather in the backpack. I want to just note this. I come back in the kitchen and I look next to the backpack, there's a feather on my counter. It's there. And I was like, oh, okay.
I don't know how they get there, but they do.
They do.
They find their way to
Find
remind
their
us.
way. Yeah. Yeah. Anise, I want to lean into part of our earlier conversation about your experience with a grief group and kind of your journey in navigating a couple of different spaces. So for our guests who maybe aren't watching but are listening, you know, from my side, right, I'm a cis white male, right? And I don't want to define how you experience the world, but I'm curious, what has it been like? And tell us about how you, like, what is your identity and how has the grief journey been similar or maybe different to others that you've talked to or been around?
That's actually a really great question. So, as a Black woman in this world, one of the things that I have noticed in this journey, there are no grief support groups for Black women.
Mm,
And I think there's this opportunity to look at the historical context of this country in that in slavery, Black women didn't have the luxury to fall apart. They were doing the backbreaking work in the fields with the men. And there's a certain strength that you had to have. You might go have a baby and have to go back to work, or you've had your baby and you're breastfeeding your child and and the master's child. So there's a certain perception of strength that is given to Black women that I don't think that people realize how harmful it actually is, because what it does is it you don't humanize us. You're like, no, you're strong. And I've had people say that, well, you're so strong. And I'm like, no, I am broken. I am not okay. I am barely keeping it together. And this perception of strength. And even with how I have gone through this journey, I've had people go, how the hell are you okay?
right? Yeah.
And it's not because I'm a Black woman, so that means that I'm strong. It actually has to do with the fact that I witnessed both of my parents go through a massive trauma, and I got to see them go through all the stages and how they came out of it. That's why I'm doing as well as I'm doing. But yeah, I realize that there's a perception definitely, and sometimes like going back to that grief group, when I got to the point that I realized I needed to get out of it, I'd be on the calls and I'm hearing everything that is horrible in their grief journey. And I remember there was one woman, bless her heart, she was like, I adopted a dog and a month later the dog died. And I was like, I don't want to be Pollyanna. I said, but what I am hearing in that experience is you adopted a dog, and for the last month of that dog's life, that dog had a great life. And she goes, oh God. And so, I say all that to say, like, as a Black woman going through the grieving process, it is different. Going into that room of white women where they all fell apart, but I'm the one that just lost my husband. Your husband died 20 years ago. Why are we consoling you?
Yeah.
And I realized that I think that was also why I wanted to do this TV show concept, because I realized it's an opportunity to educate people on what this really is. And I'm so glad that we're having this conversation.
Well, and thank you for leaning in. I appreciate it, right? And I want to own, right, that it can be uncomfortable sometimes. Even as I was thinking about opening up the question and the conversation, right? I'm a gay man. And so it's important to try and lean into lived experience in different ways. But I also too, right? Like, I don't want to define how someone experiences the world, which is why I try and ask, how do you identify? Right. It's more than visual. It's so much deeper than that. There are so many roots in it, right? Even the difference between, identifying as a Black woman and identifying as an African-American woman, right? That can be different based on people's lived experience. And so, that's really why I wanted to kind of talk through that.
And I thank you for asking that, because I
Yeah.
think what I will say is my people look at me as me. But when you're talking to someone that doesn't always know you, they do look at you through a different lens.
Yeah. So it's true. It really is.
Mhm.
I do have a question. So, the Sandwich Podcast is really supported by Tumbleweed. Tumbleweed is kind of my day job. It's a startup. We're supporting the aging population and the caregivers, the family caregivers, and kind of navigating aging and also loss. What are things that honestly, like as a Black woman, what are things we should be thinking about? What are things that you see as gaps in, technology broadly, but especially in the aging and end of life space? I mean, I think that I would be remiss as a founder of a startup working in this space to not ask. I mean, I want to understand, how can I lean in more? How can I approach these conversations, and how can we do better so that folks like yourself do feel more support and connection?
I'll be honest with you, this is why I'm an advocate for it. And thank you for asking that. I learned about it more with my mom because we got to a point where, like, okay, we recognized she had saved money. So we want to start having conversations. I think almost most cultures, except for white born Americans, are at a bit of a disadvantage because we are taught save for retirement, save for retirement, save for retirement, buy a home, save for retirement. No one tells you about the part after that. Nobody's talking to you about long-term coverage and how that means you don't have to give up your home because you have that to lean on. My mother, because of the mental health issues, was unable to get long-term coverage. But thankfully, we had money to talk to an estate attorney.
Good.
And it was because of that, we learned about the half a loaf program. We learned about, moving money. And the half a loaf program is essentially, there is an algorithm or an equation that an attorney will have. And they are able to say, okay, you have XYZ amount of money in assets, cash, whatever it is. And based on that amount of money that you have, Medicaid is going to penalize you XYZ amount of months or years. And so then what you have to do is take that money and move it or leave that in your account. Everything else is what you move out. You don't know that because it's not readily available if you're not talking to an attorney. And if you don't have money to go to an estate attorney, why are you going to know this? And so it was like, wait, what? So we can move the money. And the other part I want to note, so if you need Medicaid to come involved, which most people will, because it's $5,000 plus to move into a senior facility. And I'm talking just an apartment, like a senior 55 and older, is $5,000 a month. Yeah. If you've got long-term coverage, you can use that towards your care and you don't have to tap into your money. But if you do not have that, that means that you have to go through Medicaid. And if you have more than $999.99 in your name at a time in a month, they will take the rest.
Yeah.
And they will continue to take every single dime until you are down to $999. And that's where that penalty phase comes in. So like let's just say you had $200,000.
Yeah.
Medicaid is going to penalize you. I'm just going to throw a number out there for 20 months. So for 20 months, if you need support, they're not going to cover that. And so that's the money that you keep in your account. And it's fascinating because, again, this isn't talked about. Thankfully, we had a great attorney. He helped us. And the other thing he helped us with that is not talked about a lot, he got us with, oh God, I forget the name of what this person does, but essentially she found us the place that my mother moved to. Mm. And this is different from like a place from mom. You don't pay the person. They get paid a commission when your loved one moves in. We got to this woman because of our attorney.
Yeah.
And the place that we ended up moving my mother had a 5-year wait list. My mother got in there in 14 days.
Wow. Yeah, you're right. And it's difficult, obviously, people who are watching can see like, I am white, right? And so my experience has been different, but also similar in that I don't come from a wealthy background. My grandparents, it was a rush when we needed to get them into an assisted living home. They had a reverse mortgage. And that's a whole thing, right? They had no wills in place, certainly not a trust. They didn't we have nothing, we can't afford that. Fast forward now to work I'm doing, I'm like, oh my gosh, there are so many things that I would have done with them earlier. But one of the things that one of the biggest and easiest things I advocate for, which is really what you're tapping into, is it's estimated that 4 out of 5 of us will need Medicaid support in our later life. Huge population, right? A lot of the folks in the space that are helping to support this really focus on the generational wealth transfer. It's about $90 trillion that they're estimating is going to transfer. My thing is always, that's fantastic. That's, again, maybe 5% of the population. What about all the rest of us? Right. And so I really try and advocate for resources and information. And one of the things that I always like to call out right away is, to your point, like there is really what you do is you have to kind of spend down whatever assets that are have in order for Medicaid to start to kick in. Medicare is one component, but Medicaid is really the supplemental that can help pick up the difference, and it's income based, right? So to your point, one of the things that I always tell folks about, and I wanted to use this moment, is there's something that's actually called a Medicare spend down, where you can spend out a certain amount, but you can also do certain things to prepay and pre-plan for after death. So you can actually buy insurance policies that would cover a funeral or final expenses. And that actually is approved. It can be carved out the day that that person moves into an assisted living facility, or, maybe it's a skilled nursing facility that Medicare is going to start and Medicaid are going to kick in. And so it's really, again, that resources and that information. And I think that people are afraid to ask the question. They hear the word estate or will, and that's not for me. And so then they don't even know. And so really at the work at Tumbleweed, we're trying to do is how can we bring that into the forefront of conversation? And it is for everybody. And yeah, it can be expensive, but even a basic will, like there's a lot of great solutions out there for even $100. There's actually even some free ones where it's actually free because part of what they do is it's provided by things like, AIDS Healthcare Foundation has a partnership with one. Free Wills is another great one, right? So it's at least a starting place to get started, but people just don't know where to go. And so, how do we talk about this more?
I think I am very vocal about it. And I tell people, you have a house, you have this, you need to put it in a trust, because the other part about the trust that I loved, once we had to put my mom's assets into what was called a Medicaid trust. Mm-hmm. And what I appreciated about it is when the person passes away, there's nothing to contest. The beneficiaries, it gets split down the middle. That's it. There's no question. There's no doubt, because you're dealing with the loss. The last thing you want to be dealing with is, am I fighting with my sibling on who's going to get what? We did not have to do that because it was already established. That was a gift.
Yeah. Documentation and yes, the family dynamics. And I have experienced some very difficult ones. I don't want to go in a lot of detail, but let's just say there's some restraining orders in my family, which is so sad. Over something that really was a little bit of money, but it was not life-changing, and it just, unfortunately, I share with folks that one of the things I've personally learned in my own journey in all of this is, sadly, death can often bring out the worst in people.
Yes, it can. Because going through what I've gone through, what I now understand is that behavior, even when it's egregious, it's grief, and they don't know what to do with the grief. At its root, that's what it is. They don't have words. And so I need something to hold on to. I need something to focus on. Yeah. And, I'll use the example of when my mom passed, I raced back to St. Louis to be with her. The most normal, natural thing that felt like I did have some control in that moment was to be able to go take care of her affairs. And when I could not do that because I had to get back to my husband 24 hours later, that's when my brain broke. Mm. That was the moment my brain broke, because it was like, I just need to do something that I have control over. I need something. Yeah. I couldn't. And so I have compassion for people. I'm not excusing. Please don't be a jackass when somebody loses someone, and think about yourself and what you're supposed to get. However, I can have compassion that at its root, it's grief.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think one of the things I wanted to ask you about, Anise and Deb, I would love to hear your own journey, and also seeing Anise. Talk to me about where and how you find solace during some of these difficult moments. Or do you?
It depends. It honestly depends. I was so very fortunate and blessed that I have an amazing village. My support system is otherworldly. Again, I know that's probably not typical. I have so many people, and just to give you an indication, when Deb was talking about the 25 people that we're all in connection with, those 25 people were in the room and touching Mark when he passed away.
Wow. That's beautiful.
Literally, they were there. I was holding his hand. His best friend was holding his other hand. We were all touching him. And so that's what I have been accustomed to. my childhood friends, my dad, my sister, just all the people. I have had so much support. I still have it.
Yeah.
And so I it's like solace for me has been being very vocal about how I'm feeling, not filtering it, not trying to people please and worry about if somebody else is hurting or going to feel something because I said it, and just being very open about it. And then that way it doesn't hold on to me. When I'm having a moment, I have my moment. I'll send Deb a message. I got another friend, my therapist. I love this woman dearly because she was like, you send me a message anytime, day or night. And like my mother's birthday, it was a Saturday afternoon, and she picked up the phone and we talked it through. She gave me some steps to kind of help myself, and I kept going. So I think what I would tell people, and I know this is not always easy, having a support system is essential to getting through this. Or not even getting through it because you don't get through grief, but to navigate grief.
Yeah. So beautiful. Deb, what about you?
Oh, I love hearing Anise talk about that because it is so true. I think like being one of a very large group of people that I love very much, to be able to be with him as he crossed over is, like I said, it's life changing. And I too take solace in that the human connection, I think, is the biggest part. Is I think that people, and what I've witnessed of, because both sets of my grandparents have passed, so I've witnessed both parents grieve their parents,
Yeah.
and how people do grieve in very different ways. And in my parents' generation, it was very like private and stoic. And so I think for me, it's like reaching out, which I feel so fortunate that we do have. And it's like, I hope anyone listening, watching this, it's like to find grief groups
Yeah.
and people who can share in this too. And also, I've really learned how I need to take care of myself, like in terms of my mental health and my own health as well. Like we talk about this in our group, like I'm of an age where I had, a lot of health things going on the past couple years. Like I need to take care of myself, and I owe that to myself as well. It's to be there for my family and my friends. So yeah, connection is a big one.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think to that point, any listeners that maybe are struggling or don't feel like they have that circle or a friend group, a family group, or people they can lean on, I think sometimes too, even just asking, right? I think so often, at least here in the US, right? I think we talked a lot about we experience death in a very different way. I feel like sadly, there's a lot of kind of hands put up when thinking about death and dying and even our own mortality. But I think that if you're experiencing it, like, I think a lot of people do want to be there for you. It's just like, I don't know what to say. Right. Aside for them, like, I'm so sorry for your loss. Like, that's like where I feel like that's what we're all kind of taught here in the US. Like, that's what you say to people. But I'm always trying new ways to show up for people. And I've heard a lot of folks who work in this space and or have experienced, loss. One of the best things that we can do, and it's just a simple thing, is rather than saying, hey, is there anything I can do to help? Don't ask, just do something. Whether it's like one of our interns had a death in the family while they were in their internship, right? And so the team, we wanted to send a little bit of moment of thoughtfulness to say, hey, look, like, we're thinking about you. And for me, I grew up where food was really important in my family. Well, we're a virtual team, right? So food in that sense is very different. I can't make a casserole and take it to him and his family. So we sent him $100 gift card to go to Uber Eats, right? And I was like, look, like, maybe it's for today, or maybe it's wherever you and your family are, but at least like know that we wanted something. And to me, that was it was a moment of, I can't give you food, which is a way I would speak to you or show my empathy and my feelings towards you. But this is a virtual way we can do it a little different. And so just take action, I think sometimes is what people really need help with.
And that's huge. So my job actually gave me, I think it was like, I'll say it was over $1,000
Wow, that's
in
amazing.
Grubhub dollars so that I didn't have to think about what I was going to eat for 6 months. I didn't have to think. And to your point about people not knowing what to say, I had one friend call me and I loved him for calling me and saying this. He said, I have been avoiding calling you. He said, I had to call one of my friends to ask her what I should say because I didn't want to say the wrong thing. And he said, she told him, just listen. And one of the things that I do now, because, and I'm sure that you both have, you can connect to this, you can tell the people that know, that have experienced it or that have gone through it, because the way that they show up is just different. Like I have this one friend, literally had not seen her in 10 years, hadn't talked to her. She would just send me a message every so often. I just want you to know I love you. That
Yeah.
was it. No expectation for a phone call. Just wanted you to know I love you. Well, she had experienced the loss of her mother, her father, and her brother all within a very short amount of time. She gets it. And so now I'm that person. I'm like, I'm not going to, what do you need? I can tell you right now, the person doesn't know what they need.
Yep.
They are not okay. They can't tell you what they need. So don't ask them that. What you can do, I had one friend, she actually was like, I'm going to pay for 3 days of doggy daycare.
Oh, yeah.
It's great.
Okay, I just go drop my dog off. And as a matter of fact, at that time, I think they were coming to pick her up. So the place would come and pick her up, and a friend just paid for that. And it's not about monetarily either. Sometimes, like I said, it's just send a text and just let that person know, because that can literally be the difference between that person having a good day and not.
Yeah. I'm thinking about you.
Yeah.
I don't know what else to say, but you're on my mind. I care about you, you know? And it reminds us we're not alone, right? I think when I've talked to folks, we feel so alone.
Oh my God, losing someone you love is very isolating and it's very lonely. And even though my village was amazing, there were those times where I'm like, I don't want to get out of bed.
Yeah.
And luckily for me, I had a dog. So I couldn't lay in bed all day. And her being who she is and who my husband being who he was, he knew everybody in the neighborhood. And she's such a recognizable looking dog that you just can't miss her. So they'd be like, I recognize your dog. She used to walk with the guy. And I'd be like, how does he know all these people? And in a weird way, it was comforting
Yeah.
because it forced me to get out of the bed and get out into the world. But then I started to meet people that I hadn't known. A couple of people have actually become friends as a result of that. And so I realized it's that connection. Like Deb was saying, connection is imperative.
Yeah. His memory's living on. Right. You know, in so many ways, right? Whether it's the hawks, the feathers, and even the dog walk, you're right. It's those little things. And I can anticipate at first those questions are probably like, oh, but over time, I imagine it also to allowed you to lean in more and to make new connections, and also to realize like, oh, he knows everybody, you know, and they know him.
It's funny.
They
It was
know
actually
him.
the opposite for me.
Okay. Tell me
It
more.
was more comforting in the beginning.
Hmm.
And then towards the end, it was like when it would happen, I'd be like, oh God, I know where this is going.
Yeah.
And it's like I mean, because it literally went on for probably almost a year up until I moved. And I would just run into people. And again, it's like that part where you're like in the beginning, you're grieving, and it's just to know that he meant a lot to a lot of people. It felt really special. But then when you start to feel human, you're like, I'm having a good day. Oh God, I gotta tell them that he died. Like so it was the opposite actually for me.
So interesting. Well, I want to be mindful of time. I could sit and I could talk for hours with the two of you. And so I want to just kind of give the floor to both of you and for a couple of things. One is, is there anything that you want to share with the audience about what you guys are working on? And I'm keeping my fingers crossed for a future show that may be available for us to see. And if the answer is no, not yet, then hey, we'll update folks when that time has come, and you guys can come back in as a guest and we can have a round two. But if there is, I wanted to open the floor to that.
Deb, you want to go first?
Sure. I think for us, it's for Anise and I, it's starting in a place we're going to write some articles about grief and our experience, and from her experience and from like the friend. So we have sort of like this dialogue back and forth, and we're about to start publishing that. That's going to be like the first thing that we do. And that it is our desire to turn these articles to make them the basis of some type of wonderful show around grief group being like the center. that's our big goal and what we're working on. And I think I'm just so grateful for this opportunity to talk to you, Paul, and to listen again to Anise's journey, because there's things that I learned today that I didn't know about what she had to experience in her mom's working with her mom's affairs and things. And so, and would think I'm one of Anise's closest friends, and I didn't know certain aspects of that. So I'm grateful that I got to hear that and to open up this dialogue. And I think that I will just say one of the biggest things I have also learned in losing Mark and other people in my life over the years is it has taught me how to live. And I wanted to do that differently with like the journaling and everything. It's taught me to live in a way to not fear death, to not be afraid when friends of mine have lost people, and just how I want to experience life. It's like with the time I have left here, how do I want to do it? So those are the questions that come up for me. So thank you. I'm very grateful.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Anise?
So as Deb mentioned, we are working on a series of articles, which I'm very excited to do. That was actually a fascinating exercise for me because what I realized is I experienced it in sort of like fragmented pieces. And I think I needed to do that. It was like a self-protection thing because if you looked at
Yeah.
the full circle of what was happening, it's like, wait, what? And I remember like typing it all out and being like, how the hell am I saying? Oh my gosh. So I'm excited to kind of get that out there because I do believe one of the things both of my parents always taught me is if you can use your pain to help somebody. And Mark would often say that. So that would be one thing. And then I think what I would say for listeners, like one of I've had so many learnings. It's like they're still happening. But when I was in Spain, I had a very particular moment, and I remember hearing very clearly that grief isn't something you get over or go through or process. It is just something that becomes part of you. And I wouldn't say that to someone when they first lose someone, because if someone had said that to me, I'd be like, yeah, take this,
Uh-huh.
you know. But now being where I am, what I realize is if you can step aside from the pain of the loss, even for a moment, what you realize is that grief is a gift
Yeah.
because you were loved so deeply and you loved so deeply. And that's the gift. Some people never get that opportunity. And so the way that I look at death and my connection to death has definitely changed because of these situations. Like I got to hold my husband's hand until death did we part. That's a gift.
Yeah.
Many won't get that gift. And so what I would tell anybody grieving is like, look, the shit sandwich is the shit sandwich. You've been dealt the shit sandwich, you got to eat it, but you do have a choice on how you go through it. Do you eat it with a pickle, some chips, a beer, whatever you got to do to get it down, you're going to have to do it, but you do have a choice on how you go through the experience.
Absolutely. So beautifully said. And as we close up today with another episode of Sandwiched, Deb, Anise, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. And I believe that we are helping to bring change and transformation to uncomfortable spaces. And I believe that our listeners are really going to help with all that you've both shared and take that out into their world and make positive impact. So again, just thank you. And it's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So grateful.
Thank you. Sandwiched is a Second Act Studio production with support from Tumbleweed. We couldn't do this without the support of our production team, Maddie Willis, Brennan Plank, and our interns, Eileen O'Doherty and Anthony Cano. Thanks for listening, and remember, you are not alone. Have a great one.